All right, welcome everybody to our first virtual program that we're doing as part of the History Live Durango series, which logo looks like that. This is an insert that we have in our local paper. This program was created a couple of years ago as a part to generate more interest in localized history in Southwest Colorado, especially in the Durango area. And every year our program's been getting bigger and bigger, which is quite exciting. Obviously this year is very different due to the coronavirus, but we are pushing forward as best we can by offering our programs this year virtually. As anyone else joins this program, please know that your audio should be off and you can turn your video on or off, whatever you'd like. There will be portions for Q&A, or if you would like to ask a question, you can do so in the chat feature. So if you scroll down and you see the chat option, if you click on that, there'll be instructions in there. And then if you run into any other technical issues, my email address is in there. And so you can email me if you have any other problems. Since this is our first technical virtual program, there's bound to be some kinks we need to work out. So we appreciate your patience with that, but otherwise we're going to do our best. Tonight with us, we have Angel Vigil, and I'm going to let him introduce himself more in a minute, but this is actually Mr. Vigil's second year doing a program with our library, the Ignacio Community Library in Ignacio, Colorado. And my name is Andrew Hutchinson, and I am the Adult Services Librarian here at the library. And we're very grateful to have Mr. Vigil back in honor of Hispanic Heritage Month to share a collection of Hispanic folklore stories. A quick plug, as part of this program, we also are going to have another event next Thursday night, the 24th of September at 6 p.m., same time. Also virtually, there will be a Zoom link if you go to ignaciolibrary.org, and we have a banner that you'll see right away on our front page about History Live. If you click on that and scroll down, you'll be able to find that link and the code to enter that event. And that event is with local historian Ruth Lambert, and she's going to be talking about a Catholic church in the area in the town of Tiffany, Colorado, and the history of it. And there's a lot of interest about that church. So we hope to have that program be a success as well. And I think that's it. So Angel, I will let you take it away.
Thank you very much. I do want to say thank you to the Ignacio Community Library System and Andrew specifically for inviting me back. Last year, I was down there for several days and I taught some classes in the actual school there, the middle school, and had a great time with sixth graders. It was a lot of fun. I enjoyed that. Then I gave an evening presentation at the library and people came and that was a lot of fun. But like so much of our world now, everything's changed this year. And my work used to be all in person. I used to come to schools and libraries and art centers and festivals and in person, entertain people and tell them a little bit about the various parts of history of the Hispanic Southwest where we live. And then this year I've pivoted totally toward online, what I'm doing tonight. So right behind me, I like this, or I'd like to put the logo behind me of either the sponsoring organization or something, say if I were doing a talk, a history talk, something about the historical person I'm talking about, just so that the background kind of supports what I'm doing here. So this is the official logo for the Ignacio Community Library. So Andrew had sent that to me and I appreciate that quite a bit. What I want to do tonight is I'm going to tell some stories. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to tell some stories. A little bit just to get into it, then this isn't like going to be a big bio moment to me, but I do want to lay a little bit of foundation about where these stories come from and then why I'm the person to tell the stories. Where they come from is they come from the Hispanic community of the southwestern part of the United States and from Mexico. So what happens is these are stories that have existed in the oral tradition for generations. My numbers are kind of huge. My sister did the work. I have 63 first cousins. So that's a lot of babies being born right around the same time. I have 63 first cousins in Southern Colorado and in New Mexico. My Uncle Pat, he did the genealogical work. And then he went back like 8 or 9 generations, solid names, birthdays, deaths, and marriages. The Catholic Church specifically, along with county records, but the Catholic Church was very, very deliberate and good. They were always very organized, very systematic with keeping records. So pretty easily he found very clear lines on genealogy going back 7 or 8 generations. Another friend of mine doing very similar work came up with a number that I'm less secure about. He said, our family's been in the Southwest for 23 generations. So I'm not quite so sure about that, but I'm definitely sure for 7 or 8 generations in New Mexico, solid on the line. So what happens is, I'm long lived in this land that we're in right now, the southwestern part of the United States. My people go back to the beginning. My name Vigil is actually a little village in Asturias, which is the southwestern part of Spain. And I myself have always been interested in genealogy and done some work there and everything. So my people get on the boat centuries ago, come to the New World, right? They get off in Veracruz, where's the entry point, and then they come up the Camino Real all the way up through northern Mexico into New Mexico. And then so my people have been living in the northern part of New Mexico generations upon generations upon generation. My mom lived till she was 92 years old. And so her childhood was the same childhood of someone who lived 200 years ago in northern New Mexico. Things changed very, 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 very little until you got to her generation. So for me, one of the things that was most funny was, this is a lady, grew up rural New Mexico, alive 200 years ago, right? And then so one day, she tells me, hey, I friended you on Facebook. And I told her, Mom, I got to tell you, for a woman who's lived into her 92nd year, that you started in a house with no water and no electricity. You've lived through all these presidents. You lived through the Great Depression. You lived through World War II, everything that you lived through and everything, that you would end up asking your son that you friended him on Facebook. I've said, you'd lived an epic life historically, all that you've seen. So what happened is I started doing this work around the traditional arts of the Hispanic Southwest. And then I'm not even bragging on myself, it's just the truth. I'm the state heritage artist for Hispanic storytelling. I'm now an elder of my own community. Before me, I looked up to Cleophas Vigil, I looked up to Lalo Delgado, I looked up to Epi Darchaleta, all these people that I interviewed and everything. And they've all passed on, right? And now it's my generation, people my age. Now, believe it or not, if you want to find out about the old ways, you got to come and talk to an old person like me. I view that with serious responsibility and joyful fun, that I'm an elder of my community, and now I'm the repository of cultural history. So what I did with it is this, I'm a historian, I'm a scholar, I'm a historian. I work at the History Colorado Museum here in Denver. And so what I do all day long is I teach people about the history of Colorado and also the history of Denver. Literally, I know a lot about the history of Colorado, history of Denver, because I'm a historian and a scholar. So I enjoy that, but my subspecialty is what we're going to do now as soon as it gets started, if it ever gets started. But here's what I did. I decided I'm going to also be an author. So I've written 6 books. Here's what we got. This is one of them, The Corn Woman, Stories and Legend of Hispanic Southwest. There's 45 stories in this book. This book won a really big award, made me kind of famous in what I do. This book, a second book, The Eagle on the Cactus, Traditional Stories from Mexico. In these 2 books are 90 stories. I'm not even making it up. I have ready to go at the drop of a moment about 100 stories locked in here and in my heart, of course, you know. So there's 90 in these 2 books. I got 100 stories ready to go. I've got a list of 15 stories I might tell tonight if it goes that long. So I wrote these 2 books, award-winning books, collections of stories of the Hispanic Southwest in Mexico. Then I wrote another book, this book called Teatro, It's Hispanic plays for young people. So if you want to do some plays based upon the traditional stories, this is the book you want to do. They got to be able to read, of course. Its target range is 3rd grade to 9th grade as far as language and vocabulary goes. Then I decided, you know what, I got to get deeper into this. And I wrote this book. This was Southwest Book of the Year one year. Una Linda Raza, Cultural and Artistic Traditions of the Hispanic Southwest. This, it's a compendium of all the cultural and artistic traditions of the Hispanic Southwest. History about what the tradition is, why it's a tradition, but also it's an activity guide about how to do the tradition. Because after one of my shows, one time a little old lady comes up to me, Senor Vigil, you were wonderful. It's just too bad. And then I said, well, what's too bad? I thought my show, you just said it was wonderful. Oh, I'm not talking about you. You were great. She said, it's too bad that when we die, all this is going to be gone. And that kind of struck me. I said, all this is going to be gone? Yeah, all this is going to be gone when we die. And I said, why is that? Who's interested in the old ways anymore? And she had a point. She had a good point. She really did. So I said, well, I'm still interested in it. I better do something about this before we actually are all gone. So I went around. I actually got some grants for 2 summers to go all through southern Colorado, northern New Mexico, talking to old people. To be honest with you, they've all passed on. That's why you're stuck with me now. They've all passed on. Because when I talked to them, they were about my age now, and that was a long time ago. So unless they lived to be close to 100, doubtful, they've all passed on. So that's this book here. I tell people, if it's not in this book, you don't need to know about it. Everything's in here, even my mom's top secret chili recipe. Okay, then we have, someone told me, I grew up on a farm, part of my childhood, outside of Springer, New Mexico. Now it's almost a ghost town. 2 generations of my grandparents and great-grandparents actually buried there. So someone said, you need to write you know a lot about cowboys, don't you? I said, yeah, I got the blood of vaqueros running through my veins. I had a good American childhood, riding, roping, and shooting, right? So I do know a lot about vaquero and cowboy life. So I wrote this book, Riding Tall in the Saddle, the Cowboy Fact Book. Same thing, about cowboy life, ranch, rodeo, and cowboy life. If it's not in this book, you don't need to know about it. So I wrote this book. That was a lot of fun. And then someone said, hey, you need to write a children's book. So I did write a children's book. Poppy, how many stars are in the sky? And it's a little 32-page, it's a picture book actually, with a sweet little story about a little boy learning how to count, sitting on the porch in New Mexico, and his grandpa's telling him about the stars. Gee, I wonder who that little boy was. I don't know, we'll figure it out later. So here's what we got going. So I'm a historian, I'm a scholar. I love my job, which is sharing my culture with people. I love my job, teaching people about history. I think history is really, really important, because one day we're going to be history. And I would hope people wouldn't be dismissive about the life we're living right now, and they'd be really interested in us. I guarantee people are going to seriously be writing about 2021 days. People are going to be writing books about it. They're going to be making movies about it. Academics are going to be doing PhD dissertations about it. Andrew was telling me beforehand, the Chinese proverb, may you always live in interesting times. Yes, we are. One day, we're going to be history, and people are going to be studying us. So I don't want them to be dismissive about it. I want to be truly interested. What can they learn about the time that we lived in? So looking backwards, what can we learn about the time we lived in? So that's a little about me and where I'm coming from and why I'm the guy who gets to tell these stories and everything. I am the guy that gets to tell these stories. No one else wrote all these books. No one else is a historian and a scholar. So I say that a little bit tongue in cheek and everything, because my adult life has been spent being a repository of cultural history about myself and my people and my family. So I want to share a little bit about that with you today. Get started on these stories. Okay, here's what we got going. First, before I get going, got my trusty water right here. Okay, I'm not even making this up. One time I tried to calculate how long I could go telling stories without repeating a story. I think I could go a full day, a 24-hour period, and not straight without repeating a story. I'm not going to do that. We're going to keep this short and sweet. But the stories, just to make it easy, we're going to take a journey through types of stories. I'm going to start with Chistes. If you're a scholar of stories like I am, they're all categorized. They actually got a little number attached to them, the story types and everything, you know. But generally, the categories have been passed down oral tradition through family units, through generations, right? So here's what we got go. People still enjoy a good story well told. First story I'm going to tell, it's called a Chiste. There's a group of stories called Chistes. I know a lot of them. They're easy and simple. They're almost comic stories. What happens is these Chistes at the end, they all have a slight little twist. It's supposed to be comic, and if you listen to a lot of them, then you understand, oh, I kind of understand their sense of humor. So I got 3 of them for you here, okay? We'll start off with these pretty easy. One of them is called One for You and One for Me, okay? Uno para ti, uno para mí. Once, there were 2 compadres. These dos compadres are very good friends. They spent a lot of time at the cantina. And then coming home from the cantina late at night, well, they were singing songs, having fun. They'd had a good time. There, the compadres in the Hispanic tradition is a very close bond. To say that they're friends doesn't describe it. They're life partners, you know. These 2 men, they've been friends since childhood in the small little community they live in. So they spend a lot of time in the cantina. They're good old boys. And then every night they come back and they go by the cemetery. And they always like to scare each other. Ooh, the cemetery, all that and everything, you know. And then they go home and next day they do the same thing and everything. One day, however, well, this is what happened. This is what this story is about. One day, 2 thieves robbed the bank in the town. And they're running out and it's daylight, right? So they're like afraid that they're going to get caught, spend the rest of their life in jail. So they decided we got to hide out, and under the cloak of darkness, then we will leave town. So they didn't know where to hide. So they decided, this is what we're going to do. We're going to hide in the cemetery. No one will look for 2 thieves in the cemetery. So that's what they did. They jumped the wall, stone wall, and they hid behind some big gravestones back there, and they were real quiet and everything during the day. And they had a plan. At nighttime, they'd have to divide up the loot, what they'd stolen from the bank. And the way they're going to do it, they were going to do it the traditional way. Uno para ti, uno para mí. One for you, one for me. And they divided equally, 50-50. Uno para ti, uno para mí. One for you, one for me. So they're going to wait till nighttime to divide up the loot like that. So meanwhile, unbeknownst to them, the 2 compadres been in the cantina, and it's time for them to come home. So they're coming home, and they're going by the cemetery, and they hear voices. Now, they're not used to hearing voices in the cemetery late at night. So they go up to the stone wall. Remember I told you there's a stone wall, and they kind of peek over the stone wall. They're looking like this and everything. They do hear voices. And this is what they hear coming out of the darkness of the cemetery. Uno para mí, uno para ti. One for me, one for you. And they look at each other and say, oh my gosh, you know who that is? That's the devil and the Lord dividing up the souls. And they looked at each other and they said, oh my gosh, oh my gosh. And then they heard one of the voices say, wait a minute. Didn't we leave 2? Because the thieves had been in such a hurry when they jumped the wall, 2 bags fell on the other side of the wall and they'd forgotten about it till that moment. So they heard one of the voices say, wait a minute, let's go get those 2 outside the wall and then we'll finish dividing them up. And then the 2 thieves looked at each other and said, yikes, and they took off running. Because the truth of the matter is, you never know which pile you're going to end up in that fateful day when the Lord and the devil actually are dividing up the souls. Uno para ti, uno para mí. And that's the first chiste. Here's another chiste. It's called You First. Once there was a beloved elderly couple. They lived their long life. They'd been married so long, they didn't even remember how long they'd been married. And they had the infirmities of old age, right? But they were still alive. They're living together in their house. And what happens is this. Every morning they had a lovely little ritual. The wife would get out of bed first, and she'd have to stretch and make sure all the parts are working. And then the old man, he'd get out of bed and he'd have to stretch, make sure all the parts are working. And then he'd look at his beloved wife and he'd say, "Vieja." I got to tell you, vieja, it actually means old lady, but it's not a mean term. It's a term of endearment in the Hispanic community. Vieja, if the good Lord sends down an archangel today for me, I'm ready to go. I've lived a long life. I'm ready to go. And then the vieja, the old lady, she looked at her old man and she said, "No, no, 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 no. The grandchildren still need you. I've lived a long life. I'm ready to go. If the good Lord sends down an archangel today, I'll go first." So every morning they play that little game. No, I'll go first. No, I'll go first. Now, one day, however, the devil himself was on this earth, and he was walking around just wanting to cause mischief in human affairs, as if that's the job of the devil, right? So he's walking around to cause mischief in human affairs, and he actually sees and hears the couple with their "no, I'll go first, no, I'll go first" with their morning little ritual game. So he decides to play a joke on them. He casts a spell on himself, disguises himself as an archangel of the Lord. And he comes up to the house, knocks on the door, and then the old man, he looks at the old lady, and they're not used to having visitors hardly ever, much less early in the morning, so they don't know what to do. But the lady said, "Oh, gee, maybe better go answer the door." So the old man says, "No, no, okay." So he goes in, and he opens the door, and standing in front of him is an archangel of the Lord. Now, it's really the devil in disguise, but according to the old man, standing in front of him was an archangel of the Lord. And the old man looked at the old lady looked at the old man looked at the old lady, and then the old man cleared his throat. "You know, I've been thinking, I think you're right. You first." Here's another chiste. This is called Like Father, Like Son. This is actually my favorite one. Honestly, I know dozens of these. They're short, they're easy. I like the little comic twist to each of them at the end. So this one's called Like Father, Like Son. Okay, so once there was a family living on a farm outside of the village. And they had to work from sun up to sundown. If you've ever been a farmer, you know there's no such thing as time off. You're always working hard all the time. So then what happens is this. The grandfather, well, he was still like this, right? He was still fuerte. He was still strong. And so he'd work from sun up to sundown too. He'd take care of the barn. He'd take care of the fence. He'd take care of the animals. But then one day, the grandfather, he just decided he was just too old and tired, and he was done doing all that hard work. And so he comes in one day at the end of the day, and he tells everyone, "Okay, I'm done. I'm no longer going to be doing all the work here like this. I'm old, I'm tired, and someone else can take care of the barn. Someone else can fix the fence. Someone else can take care of the animals. I'm old, I'm tired, I am done. And by the way, keep those kids quiet. All they do is bug me all day long." Well, that was the final straw. Because the father of the family, he could take that the grandfather was old and tired, didn't want to do anymore. But he could not take the grandfather criticizing how he was raising his kids. So he points to his eldest son and he says, "Go get that blanket. Go get that blanket." And so the son brings the blanket over like this. And he tells him, "If the grandfather is so unhappy with the job we're doing with all the kids here in the house, the grandfather can live in the barn. Take the blanket to the barn, and grandpa's going to live in the barn from now on." So then what happens is the kid, well, he spreads out the blanket like this, and then he gets a pair of scissors. And then he's just starting to cut the blanket into two pieces. And the father says, wait, stop. What are you doing? There's two, that's a blanket. It took me all fall to weave that special blanket. What are you doing cutting in two pieces? I don't know. And the son says, "Well, Poppy, here's what I'm doing. Grandpa's, well, he's just gotten old and worthless, and we're going to move him to the barn. So I was going to have two pieces. So this piece is for Grandpa because he's old and worthless, and we're going to move him in the barn. And I'm going to save the other piece for when you're old and worthless and it's time to move you in the barn." From that day forward, Grandpa lived in the house. Now you notice all these little chistes? They all have to do with friendship, with families, with tradition and everything. And in the heart of all these stories is the traditions of people, the traditions of a life well lived on this earth. Almost all of them, believe it or not, have some sort of little message to them about how to be a good person on this earth. Even wrapped up in the little chistes like those, teach you a little bit. The last one, of course, was always respect your elders. No matter what's going on, respect your elders. They get to live in the house, not in the barn, even when they get old and worthless, right? Okay, so one day I'm going to stay living in the house all the time. I'm not going to get old and worthless. Okay, so those were some, I like to warm it up a little bit with those chistes like that. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to switch to another category of stories, and I'm going to tell two children's stories, okay? All these stories were meant to be told in the family unit. It's not like, oh, movies nowadays, oh, that's not for young kids, or that. No, these stories were all told around the winter's fire, around the harvest feast, at a wedding, because you have to remember, back in the day, no TV, no internet, no texting, right? So what happens is they had a lot of spare time on their hands. And you had two things. The reason there's all these stories like this is, one, you had quintistas. That's what I am. People that knew a lot of stories, like sharing the stories in the family unit, right? But then you also had people with time on their hands willing to listen to a long story, or willing to listen to a lot of stories. That doesn't exist anymore. If you want to hear stories, you got to do what you're doing right now. You got to log on to the library thing. You got to come and see me at the library. You got to find a special show where storytellers are telling stories. The format of where the stories exist doesn't exist anymore. One of the reasons is, when I've been in a household, the TV's always on, right? Or especially young people, seriously on this bad boy, right? They're like this, doing like that. So to get people away from modern technology is tricky nowadays. But I do know through all my shows that people still enjoy a story well told by a good storyteller, and that the stories themselves have interest. So what I started out with was these three chistes. So now I'm going to tell two stories, specifically more childlike in their subject matter. They're almost like Aesop fables in the sense that they're animals that can talk and have lives like human beings. But what happens is, at the end of the story, there's like Aesop's fables, there's always a moral. So these stories always have morals attached to them. This first one's called The Dust Devil. Now, we know the dust devil, especially if you live in the Southwest, that's in the summer, especially, that's spinning little bitty mini tornado. You see it on the open plains, on the llanos a lot, right? So the dust devil, we know what that is. Well, here's a story about a dust devil. Once there was a little girl. This little girl, well, she was unhappy. She was sitting under the tree, and she was crying. And she wasn't crying the way you cry, like if you got an owie, you broke your toe, you've been scolded or something. No, she was crying the way you cry, like when your heart's broken and lonely. Deep, sobbing, lonely, crying. So what happens is, the father comes in from working in the field and says, Mija, why are you crying? I'm lonely, Daddy. And then he said, oh, Mija, I can't help you. You know, we live out on the farm, and I know it's miles to the next farm, and I know if you don't see your friends at school, there's no friends here. I can't help you with that one. And she said, Bobby, I'm so lonely. And she says, he said, well, you do have some friends. You should appreciate the friends you do have. And just then the cat, El Gato, came and wrapped right around her leg like this. You know, cats like to come and wrap around your leg like that. El Gato came and wrapped around her leg just like that. And the cat was, you know, cats like to do that. And then the bird flew around, landed right on her shoulder here. She was the only little girl that had a bird that could land on her shoulder, and then she could feed the bird just like that, right on her shoulder. And over in the corral was the cow. And she had a special relationship with the cow. She could jump on the cow's back, and the cow would take her for a ride, just like that. So the father said, you have good friends. You have the cat, you have the bird, you have the cow. You should be happy with the friends you have. The little girl says, well, Poppy, I want people friends. Now that made the father angry because, well, he thought the little girl had some good friends. And the way she said, I want people friends, he didn't like that. So he said, you can sit here and think about what you said. I have work to do in the field and I'll come and talk to you about you later, but you should think about the good friends you do have. I want people friends. And that's how it was left. Pretty soon the cat comes up, cat wraps around her leg, starts purring. The cat says, little girl, why are you crying? What are you so sad for? What are you crying about? Well, I'm lonely. I don't have any friends. And the cat goes, come chase me like you do every day, and we'll run around and we'll have a lot of fun. And the girl says, well, Gato, that might have been fun yesterday, but today I want people friends. And the cat was heartbroken. And the cat walked away sad because the cat always thought it was a friend of the little girl. Just then, shoo, bird landed right on the little girl's shoulder. Bird said, little girl, why are you so sad? I've never seen you so sad. Well, Bird, truth of the matter is, I'm lonely. I want a friend to play with. And the bird said, shoo, come fly with me like you do every day, and we'll fly up above, and we'll look down, and we'll swoop, and we'll see all the people on the earth in their busy little ways running around like ants. Shoo. The girl says, well, Bird, that was fun yesterday, but today I want people friends. Shoo. And the bird flew away sad and heartbroken because shoo, it thought it was a friend of the little girl. Just then, who shows up but the cow? Little girl, why are you crying? I'm lonely. I don't have any friends. Little girl, jump on my back and I'll give you a ride. Isn't anybody listening? I want people friends. And the cow walked away sad and heartbroken because the cow thought it was a friend of the little girl. Then what happens is this. Suddenly off in the distance was the whirlwind of dust, spinning wild and crazy, spinning and spinning and spinning. And that whirlwind of dust came right to where the little girl was. And right in front of the little girl, that whirlwind of dust stopped. All the dust settled from the top of the sky to the bottom of the ground, and there was a person. And the person said, little girl, I've come to be your special friend. Little girl said, oh, a person friend for me, a person friend for me. Yes, little girl, I've come to be your special friend. Oh, a person friend for me, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Yes, little girl, why don't you come to my house? You'll love it in my house. Just then, up jumped the cat. The cat said, little girl, do not go. It's the Diablo, El Diablo, the devil himself. If you go to his house, we'll never see you again. Ooh, that made El Diablo mad. Boom, he kicked the cat. Psh, cat goes flying. Little girl goes, shoo. Why'd you kick my friend the cat? I love my friend the cat. Why'd you kick my friend the cat? And El Diablo says, oh, gee, I made a mistake. I thought it was a tumbleweed. And I was just kicking that tumbleweed out of the way. In my house, I have lots of cats. You love it in my house. Why don't you come to my house? Just then the bird, shoo, little girl, don't go. Whatever you do, it's El Diablo. If El Diablo gets you, we'll never see you again. Do not go with El Diablo. And the bird started to fly away. El Diablo shot out a bolt of lightning. Boom, splat, hit the bird. Bird hits the ground. Little girl looks at the bird and says, why'd you do that to my friend the bird? I love my friend the bird. Why'd you do that? And El Diablo says, oh, gee, I can't believe I made 2 mistakes in one day. I thought it was, oh yeah, I thought it was a snake falling from the sky. I was just trying to get that snake out of the way. I have lots of birds in my house. You'll love it in my house. Why don't you come to my house? And then who jumped out but the cow? Little girl, don't go. It's El Diablo. That made El Diablo furious. He kicked that cow. Psh, the cow goes flying. And that's the real reason the cow jumped over the moon. And then little girl says, huh, you are El Diablo. Yes, and they're coming to my house. And he reached forward to grab her like that. Up jumped the cat. Cat starts scratching El Diablo's face. El Diablo couldn't see a thing. Spins around real mad. Tries to get that girl like this. Up jumps the bird. Bird puts its claws on El Diablo's hand. Tears it away. Cat scratching El Diablo's face. Bird pecking El Diablo in the head. El Diablo spins around, super mad, tries to get a little girl, and who's standing there? Psh! You are not about to get this little girl. Whew! Starts pawing at the ground, snorting. El Diablo knew the little girl had been saved by her friends. He got so mad and furious, he started spinning and spinning and spinning and spinning. All that dust came up from the bottom of the ground to the top of the sky, making a giant whirlwind of dust. And that's the reason, to this day, when people see a whirlwind of dust like that out on the open flat plains, they call it a dust devil, because they know mad spinning about something inside is the devil himself. Later that day, under the tree, the little girl sitting there, kind of peaceful. And the father comes in from the field, and the father says, little girl, did you think about what I told you to think about? Yeah, I did, Pop. Yes, I did, Poppy. What did you think about? Just then the cat came, wrapped around the little girl's leg. Just then the bird came and landed on her shoulder. And over in the corral, gently swaying back and forth, was the cow. The little girl said, Poppy, this is what I learned today. I may not have people friends here. She looked at the cat. She looked at the bird. She looked at the cow. And she said, but the friends I do have are the best friends a little girl could ever have. And that's the story of the Dust Devil. And why the cow jumped over the moon and how the Dust Devil got its name. You didn't know that, did you? Now you do. Okay, here we got going now. Los Tres Ratoncitos. Okay, here's a story about Los Tres Ratoncitos. Well, once there were the three mice. I got to tell you about the three mice. They were brats. They were smart alecky. They thought they could do whatever they wanted to do. So here's what happened. So they're in the mouse hole, right? And then the mom, well, she needed to leave to go out to look for some food. So she told the Tres Ratoncitos, the three little mice, she says, I got to go out. I'm going to get some food. I'm going to bring it back. Do not leave the hole. Reason is, outside is El Gato, the cat. And I got to tell you, the cat, if the cat does find you, well, you know what's going to happen to you? He will eat you. And it'll be ratoncito sandwich for the cat. Do not leave the hole. So, oh, mama, oh, you can trust us. We would never leave the hole because out there, El Gato, we're scared of El Gato. We would never leave the hole. The mom leaves. Guess what the three ratoncitos did? They left the hole. They peek their heads out. They go, oh, mama, she's such a scaredy cat. She thinks El Gato's going to get us. El Gato's not going to get us. Absolutely not. And so they peek outside like this. Sure enough, there's no cat. The coast is clear. So they go over to the table, the dinner table, and they're used to this because the people eating there, they always drop some breadcrumbs, a piece of cheese falls down. There's always food on the floor. So the ratoncitos, they're busy eating and eating and eating and everything like this. And then what they didn't see coming around the corner, well, if you've ever seen it, the cat. And when the cat saw those tres ratoncitos, the three little mice, where it stood very still, and you know cats, they lean forward and their tail goes straight, and they're locked in on their prey. And for the cat, his dinner, right? He's already licking his chops like this. Just as the cat's getting ready to pounce down, the mom comes around and sees the whole stories. There's the tres ratoncitos outside the hole like they're not supposed to be. There's El Gato getting ready to pounce and eat them. And the mom does what the mom's supposed to do. She jumps between the tres ratoncitos and the cat. Now she's in the middle. She puffs herself up big like this. And then she does something wild and crazy. She starts barking like a dog. Woo, 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 woo. Starts barking like a dog. As soon as the cat heard a dog barking, well, then the cat got scared, looked around, could see the dog, but it could hear the dog barking. Ooh, the cat took off, left the tres ratoncitos there with their mom. So their mom takes the three cats inside, And of course, she's scolding. I thought I told you not to leave. That's what I told you about. The cat almost ate you if I hadn't come and saved the day. And then the three ratoncitos now. I mean, that was so scary. Oh, we thought the cat was licking his chops. I know I would never leave the house again. Mama, why'd you bark like a dog? And then my mom looked at them and said, see, let this be a lesson to you. Sometimes it's good to be able to speak more than one language. So here's what we got. Now I've gone through one for you, one for me, you first, like father, like son, the dust devil, los tres ratoncitos. Already rolled out 5 stories, okay? Now here's what we got going. Now I drink some water. I'm going to keep telling stories, okay? We're going to leave the category stories, which I consider the more light-hearted stories. We had 3 Chistes. They're definitely more comic in structure, story structure. Then we had 2 stories, definitely children's stories, because they're like Aesop fables. They had animals in them, and the animals can talk, right? The animals can talk to people. They can talk to each other. Like in Aesop's fables, these stories where the animals can talk, the animals are actually like human beings. They have the adventures, they have the stories of human beings. And at the end, there's always a moral. The moral of the dust devil was to appreciate the friends that you have. The moral of los tres ratoncitos is it's good to speak more than one language. So those are little subtle messages and morals from adults to children. Okay, what I'd like to do now is I want to tell kind of a teaching tale. And the reason I call it a teaching tale is, remember I told you all the stories have some sort of lesson attached to them, right? The stories themselves represent cultural history, but the stories themselves also represent cultural wisdom. And so adults would tell these stories to the whole family to kind of unify everyone. This is who we are. These stories tell us who we are, but they also tell the outside world who we are. And if you study world folklore, there's a million stories around the world, right? Every culture has its own set of stories. Every people tell their own stories. So these are stories from the Hispanic Southwest. So this is a story called Los Tres Buenos Consejos, the 3 pieces of good advice. Now, like I told you, I got 100 stories up here, you know. I actually went through and decided when I was making my list about stories to tell tonight, what would be a range of stories? Because when I was there last time, I told 3 stories. And whenever I do a storytelling show, I always write down. So when I was there in the fall last year, I wrote down in the library, I was telling stories to a group of people with stories I told. So I made a point today to choose some different stories. Near the end, I might retell some of those stories, but out of 100 stories, I told some stories I like telling. It's a very common question, especially when I'm doing shows in schools. And at the end, we always do questions and answers, and I like to answer whatever question people have. And kids always ask, do I have a favorite story? And then if adults ask me that question, they'll frequently ask, is there a story of yours that's your favorite story? And I tell adults, I don't use this answer, but the answer I give for adults is, well, that's like asking, who's your favorite child, right? There's no answer to that question. I like this one for this reason. I like that one for that reason, you know? So with kids, I always tell them, well, I do have a favorite story. That's the story I'm telling right now. Whatever the story I'm telling you right now, that's my favorite story. And then when I go to the next story, then that's my favorite story, because I enjoy the story so much. At the moment of telling it, I'm thinking, this is my favorite story, until I get to the next story. So the real answer is they're all my favorite story, but I like this one for that reason. I like this one for that reason. I enjoy the Chistes. I enjoy the children's tale. This tale I'm going to tell you now is could be classified as an adventure tale. I call it a teaching tale because it does have a lesson inside of it. It's called Los Tres Buenos Consejos, which means the 3 pieces of good advice. Now, this is a subcategory of these stories called Dos Compadres stories. And I've already told you one of them already, the story One for Me, One for You, about the two friends outside the cemetery that thought the Lord and the devil were dividing up the souls. A lot of these stories have structured in them two friends, and they're always opposites, right? One's like this, one's like that. And that causes, if you're a scholar, dramatic distance. You want dramatic distance between your characters. So the two characters would always be different personalities. So you'll see this in this next story because it's a subcategory of a Dos Compadres stories. It tells a story about two friends and what happens in their friendship. Los tres buenos consejos, the three pieces of good advice. Here's what we got going. Once there was a village, and it just so happened that for years there had been drought. And so the farmers of the village and the farmers that lived outside the village, they're very, very, very struggling to provide food for their families. And it was extremely common for men to leave the village and go into the town, which was over the mountain, to find work. And when the man left the village and went over the mountain to the town to find work, well, the family, there's crying, but truthfully, everyone wanted the man to go over the mountain to the town to find work, because then he could send money back, right? And they could buy some supplies from the store because they weren't able to do subsistence living, growing the things they needed on the farm. So that happened to this one farmer. Finally decided, I can't support my family on the farm anymore. I'm not moving everyone to town, because what would we do there? We like our little farm. So I'm going over the mountaintop, going to town, I'm going to find work. So he told his wife and kids, and there's all this crying. The kids were holding onto his leg. Don't leave, Papi, don't leave. And the wife was saying, please don't leave, don't leave. But in their heart, they wanted him to leave because they were barely making it. So they say their goodbyes and everything. And he especially looked at his children. And he didn't know how long. He knew men that had left, and it had been years before they came back. So he looked at his children, and he held their face right in his hand like this, and he looked at each one. He looked at his son, and he said, while I'm gone, you'll be the man of the house. Gave him that speech, right? You'll be the man of the house. And when I come back, I may not even recognize you because you might have grown up by then and become a man yourself. So told everyone goodbye, kissed his wife goodbye, and he remembered, he looked at their faces. When I come back, I might not even recognize you. You could be growing up by the time, because he didn't know when he'd get back. So he goes, leaving town, and runs into one of his compadres, one of his friends, and he tells him, I can't make it here anymore. I got to go into town. And his compadre said the same thing. I'm just like you. I'm not making it. Hey, why don't we go together? It'd be safer for us on the road, in case you run into thieves, of course. Why don't we go together? And the man, his compadre, went and told his family goodbye. Same scene was acted over again. Bunch of tears, but he packed his bag. Now the two compadres, they're going over the mountain to the town to find work. So they're walking outside of town, and they're laughing and joking, having fun and everything. And well, one of the compadres was a hard-working compadre, and the other compadre was a lazy compadre. And they were talking about the type of jobs you're going to get in town. And the lazy compadre, the hard-working compadre, he says, I'm going to take whatever job I can get as long as it makes money and I can send it back to him and support my family. And the lazy compadre says, you know what? Of course I want a job like that too, but let me tell you about the job I really want. I want a job where you make a lot of money for no work. And my office, air conditioning with a secretary. And then the hard-working compadre said, there's not a job like that for us, a job with no work, with air conditioning and a secretary. I want whatever job I'm willing to get to make the money I need to support my family. So they laughed about that, the hard-working compadre and the lazy compadre. And the lazy compadre was imagining his office and the secretary and working and making a lot of money doing no work. Meanwhile, they're walking along, and then around the corner comes an old man carrying something big and heavy, He comes around the corner, he's got something big and heavy. And what he has is, as you get closer, they notice it's a bag filled with gold coins. In fact, it was so many gold coins, they were spilling over the top like this. And he comes up around the corner, and the two compadres come up to the old man and said, "Oh my gosh, where did you find a bag of gold coins?" And the lazy compadre says, "Is there anything I can do to get a bag of gold coins? Because that's what I need." And the old man, he looked at the two of them. He looked them real in the eyes, and he got real quiet. And he says, "Well, let me tell you what I'm going to do, because I can tell you're hardworking men. I can tell your heart's good. And I can tell you're trying to provide for your family. So I'm going to make you an offer. I'm an old man. I actually don't need all this money. I'd keep some of it myself, but I don't need all these gold coins. So I'm willing to give you some of it, but you got to make a choice. I'm going to give you this choice. I will give you either 3 pieces of good advice, 3 buenos consejos, or I'll give you half my bag of gold." Well, I got to tell you what the lazy compadre did. He didn't even hesitate. He grabbed half the bag of gold. He says, "I told you, my dream came true. I'm missing the air conditioning in the secretary, but I don't need that. Look at all the money I got for no work. That's exactly what I was dreaming would come true." And then he looked at his friend, the hardworking compadre. He says, "Well, why don't you take the other half bag of gold? What are you waiting for?" And then the hardworking compadre, he was thinking, you could tell he was deep in thought. And he says, "Well, of course I want to take the half bag of gold and get a bunch of money for no work, but maybe it's a trick question. Maybe the old man knows something. Maybe he's a wizard in disguise. Maybe the 3 buenos consejos, the 3 pieces of good advice, are good pieces of advice. Because if I get the bag of gold, well, we both know what we're going to do. We're going to spend it, and pretty soon it'll be all gone. We'll be back right where we're at with nothing, having to go over the mountaintop to get work. Maybe the 3 pieces of good advice have the secret about how to have money your whole life." So he thought about it, and he said, he looked at the old man, and he says, "I'll take the 3 pieces of good advice." Well, I got to tell you, the lazy compadre, he rolled on the ground laughing so hard he couldn't believe his friend had given up a half bag of gold. He couldn't believe what was happening. So he said, "Oh boy, I can't believe that." And even the hardworking compadre started to doubt himself. And so he looked at the old man and he said, "Well, what are the 3 pieces of advice? I just gave up a bag of gold for them. I'd like to know what they are." And the old man says, "Oh, you've chosen very wisely, chosen very wisely. The first piece of advice: never take the shortcut." Well, I got to tell you, the lazy compadre started laughing. He said, "You gave up a bag of gold for advice, never take the shortcut? I don't believe it. I don't believe it." And then even the hardworking compadre was a little disappointed in that first piece of advice. And then he said, "Well, what's the second piece of advice?" The second piece of advice is this, mind your own business. And the lazy compadre says, "Okay, so far, let me just keep count here. Don't take a shortcut and mind your own business. You gave that up for a bag of gold?" They started laughing. And then by now, the hardworking compadre, he's getting a little bit nervous about this thing, and maybe his plan had backfired. So he looks at the old man. He says, "Oh, those first 2, they were just the trick ones. I know the last one's going to be the piece of advice going to help me have money my whole life. So let me have it. Tell me what it is." And the man says, "Oh, the last one's the best one of all. That's why I always save it for last. Last one is this one: think before you act." Well, now the lazy compadre wasn't laughing anymore, because he felt really bad for the hardworking compadre. And the hardworking compadre says, "Wait a minute, let me get this straight. Don't take the shortcut, mind my own business, and think before you act. I gave up a bag of gold for that?" And the old man says, "Yes, and you chose very wisely." And then the old man, he wandered off. And the lazy compadre, he says, "Well, I don't know what to tell you, but I'm going back home because I got a bag of gold." Done. And they gave each other an abrazo, a big hug and everything. And then one went home, and the hardworking compadre by himself had to go over the mountaintop to the town. And as they were parting ways, the hardworking compadre yelled at his friend and said, "Hey, don't forget the first piece of advice. Do not take the shortcut." And then the lazy compadre yelled back, hey, you took the advice. I took the gold. Adios, amigo. And they parted ways. So hardworking compadre is heading over the mountain. Now the lazy compadre, he's lazy, right? He didn't want to walk all the way home, and he did remember a shortcut through the forest. And he says, oh, gee, maybe I shouldn't take it. That old man, what a loco he was, right? So he took the shortcut because he's lazy and wanted to get home faster. So as he's taking the shortcut, what happened was, as he comes around a bend, there were some bandidos, there were some bandits there setting up for the night. Well, I do not need to tell you what those bandits did when they saw the lazy compadre come around the bend with a bag of gold. You know exactly what happened. Big, bang, boom, tied him up, threw him in the thistle bushes, stole the bag of gold, went off laughing. So now the lazy compadre is all bundled up like this in the bushes, teeth missing, black eye, the bag of gold gone. And he thinks to himself and he says, you know that first piece of advice? That was a good piece of advice. So now the hardworking compadre, he's got into town and he found a job. Remember, he wasn't proud. He took the job he could get. He was a dishwasher in a restaurant. And he worked there for years and years and years, washing dishes. And he'd send money back to the village, and he felt good about that because he knew his family had money to buy food from the store. But he dreamed about a day when he'd be reunited with his family, but he gave up hope after a while it would ever happen. So then what happened is this. He noticed the owners of the restaurant, a man and a woman. The man, well, he had a nickname, El Flaco. He's very skinny, and flaco in Spanish means skinny. And the wife, well, she was flaco too. She was all skinny too. Here they were, they ran a restaurant. And when they'd eat meat, their meal, they'd eat a couple bites of tortilla, a couple bites of the pozole soup. But they ran a restaurant and they were both skinny. They barely ate at all. So the dishwasher, our former hardworking farmer, he was curious about this, and he's going, why are they flaco? Why do they not eat? Why are they so skinny? They own a big restaurant. They could be gordo. They could eat all the time. They could be fat. Why do they do this? And he decided he was going to ask them. But then he was thinking about this. He said, wait a minute. You remember the 3 pieces of advice. He says, I had 3 pieces of advice. Now that first one, I'll never take the shortcut. I don't know if that turned out right or if that's a good piece of advice or not. But the second piece of advice was to mind your own business. And I gave up a bag of gold for it. So I'm going to take that piece of advice. I'm going to mind your own business. So she decided what she was going to do. He was not going to ask them why they were so skinny. So then what happened is this. He goes, keeps dishwashing. One day the man comes up, tells him, hey, dishwasher, come here. She came over to him. Hey, dishwasher, restaurant's yours. Restaurant's mine. I'm just a dishwasher. Why are you giving me the restaurant? Well, you might have noticed the wife and me, the vieja, that, we don't eat very much. It's our own business. It's for a reason. People are always bugging us. Why are we so flaco? Why we don't eat? Why don't we eat more? We should be fatter. Why don't we? And they started to bug us and bug us and bug us. Now, you know, we don't have any kids. So we decided what we would do when we're ready to retire, we give the restaurant to the man who could mind his own business and wouldn't bug us about why we're so skinny. Dishwasher said, you know that second piece of advice? That was a good piece of advice. Well, now he owns a restaurant. And he decided, you know what I'm going to do? I live in town. We're restaurant owners. I'm going to go back to the village, get my kids, my wife. We're all going to move to the town. And now we're going to run a restaurant in the town. And we're going to have money the rest of our life. So he goes back to the village. And on the way to the village, as he goes into the village, he sees his compadre. Compadre says, oh man, you don't believe what happened. I took the shortcut. I never should have taken the shortcut. I ran around the bend and bang, 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 bang. They stole the gold. That first piece of advice was a good piece of advice. And then the hardworking farmer told his friend about the dishwashing situation. And he said, you know that second piece of advice to mind your own business? That was a good piece of advice. The 2 pieces of advice were good. Now I own a restaurant. I'm going to have money in my whole rest of my life. It's all done. So they gave themselves an abrazo. They had a good re-meeting. And now the farmer decided to sneak up on his house, surprise his family. So he goes up to his house and he peeks in the window, see what's going on. And what he saw made his blood boil. Inside, Sitting on the couch was his beloved wife. And sitting next to her, a handsome young man. And the wife had her head on the young man's shoulder, and the young man had his arm around his wife. Actually gave her a little kiss on the cheek and was stroking her hair and everything. And the husband said, "This is the thanks I get for all the work I did. This is what I come home to catch my wife with another man." And he's getting ready to barge in and get his justice. And he says, wait a minute. Remember the third piece of advice: think before you act. And he said that first piece of advice was good. Second piece of advice was good. I bet the third piece of advice is good too. I'm going to take it. I'm going to think before I act. And he calmed himself down. He went up to the door of his house and he knocked on the door. And when the door opened, standing in front of him was the young man who'd been on the couch with his wife. And he looked at him and he immediately recognized it had come true. His son had grown up and was a young man now. And the son had been comforting the wife on the bed, his mom on the couch. His mom, about her heartbreak about her husband being gone for all those years. And they gave himself a big hug, and the wife came over and gave him a big hug. And then he told him the whole story, the story I just told you. Story about the old man, story about the bag of gold, about the 3 pieces of advice. And he told him, we're going to go into town and we're going to run a restaurant that we now own as a family, and we'll have money our whole life, and we'll be on easy street compared to the life we're living now. So I tell you now, if ever a man comes around the corner with a bag of gold and offers you the gold or 3 pieces of advice, my advice is take the 3 pieces of advice. Thank you very much. Okay. What do you think? I got more stories. I could keep going. Are we good?
Yeah, I would say keep doing it.
I'm going to keep going. Now, that last story I told you, that's my favorite story. Until I start the next one, and then that'll be my favorite story. Okay. I'm gonna jump story types now. One of the books I wrote was this book, Riding Tall in the Saddle. And it's about everything about cowboys. So I do know a lot about vaqueros. Oh, well, I'll show you a picture. Part of the work I do the historical characters. Here we are. I do these historical characters. One of them is a vaquero, and this is me. I have a vaquero outfit that I wear, and I twirl the rope and I crack the whip and everything, you know. One of them's a Spanish conquistador. One of them's a mountain trapper man. I have all these historical characters I like doing. But when I'm El Vaquero and I'm telling Riding Tall in the Saddle, a Cowboy Fact book written by Angel Vigil, that'd be me. I've learned a lot of stories, cowboy stories. And the reason I know a lot of cowboy stories is because I've heard a lot of them. So what I do then is this. I'm going to tell you a couple of cowboy stories, okay? So here's one of them. And the Stampede at Cimarron. Okay, here's what happens at the Stampede at Cimarron. I'm going to tell this story in the first person, okay? When I was first starting out doing vaquero cowboy work, well, when you're taking the herd down the trail, here's what would happen. You only got 7 or 8 men. This could be 1,500 head, a very, very large herd. You only need 7 or 8 men. If you had more, that's okay too, but a small group, if you know what you're doing, in your tight group, don't need a lot of men. You had the trail boss, and he rides in front. And he rides tall in the saddle. He's dressed clean, right? He's dressed all clean. And he's the trail boss. He knows where you're going. And then on the side are the men riding flank. And the men riding flank, their job is to keep the herd squeezed in like this. And in the back is the guy riding drag. It's the worst job. And me being the youngest man on the outfit, I was riding drag. Wasn't like the trail boss riding clean in front, riding tall in the saddle. I was riding dirty, low in the saddle in the back, because when you're riding drag behind 1,500 head, even 100 head, it's dirty. All this dust is kicked up. I got to tell you about cattle like horses. They poop and pee all the time, right? So you're going through all that, dust being kicked up, the noise of it and everything. It's hot and dirty. So you're all hunkered down. I'm all hunkered down. I got my hat pulled down, got my wild rag, my bandana down like that and everything. Because it's dirty. It's a dirty job, riding drag. And then, but I knew I was the youngest man in the outfit and I'd have to work my way up. And then, so I was happy to be on the outfit even though I was riding drag. So here's what happens. Going down the lane like this and everything, and there's a code of the West. And the code of the West is how men behave when they're out with the herd. Got to tell you about what I noticed. The code of the West, no man will ever tell you what the code of the West is. The only way you learn about the code of the West, or the cowboy code, or the vaquero code, is by working with men who live by the code. So if you're working with men who live by the code, just pick it up, right? Just pick it up. So I was really paying attention because I was new to this. How do I learn how to be? How do I learn how to be a man on the trail? How do I learn to be a working vaquero? I'm going to watch the older men. I'm going to learn by watching. So I'm paying attention, and I noticed the men, well, when they looked at each other, they really looked at each other. I had to tell you about vaqueros and cowboys, what they say about them, that they're men of few words. It's true. They don't say a lot. The reason is they don't need to say a lot. Part of the outfit, everyone already know you're a righteous man. You don't need to prove it. Prove it by doing your work every day. So what happens is, I'm out there, and I'm watching the men, but they never look at me. The reason they never look at me is because why would they look at me? I'm the guy riding drag back there. I haven't earned their respect. One of the parts of the code of the West is this, is if a man looks at you in the eye, well, you're looking back at the eye. And you don't want to be the first man to look away. Because if you're the first man to look away, then from that day on, your nickname's going to be Oh Shifty Eyes, right? And you don't want to be known as Oh Shifty Eyes. So I noticed the men, they look at each other, and then it's like some unspoken moment, they both decide to look away at the same time. But I couldn't judge what that moment is because I wasn't experienced at it, you know. So I know they were calling me Oh Shifty Eyes, even though they never even bothered to look at me. Maybe they give me a glance, but that's about it. But they never lock onto me with that gaze of recognition. And then so I noticed how they talked about each other, and I noticed how the compliment they would give to a man they respected. They had two compliments. One was, well, he rides tall in the saddle. And that meant more than he was a good horseman. It meant he was righteous. He rode tall in the saddle. Now, I didn't ride tall in the saddle. I was Mr. Slouched Over, riding drag in the back. I already told you that part. But their ultimate compliment about another man, they'd say, well, he's one to ride the river with. I got to tell you about the river, especially if it's a deep, fast one. Every head in the herd is valuable. You got to get every head across the river. If you lose a head, $50 out of the owner's pocket, right? So every head has to get across the river. Now I got to tell you about rivers. Everyone in the outfit, we couldn't swim. Why would we learn to swim? Spend our whole life on top of a horse. We didn't know how to swim. Now, people say that horses and cows can swim. Well, I'm here to tell you, yeah, they can swim. But you ever seen a dog swim? No. It's the same type of idea. The head's above the water. Below, the four legs are just going like crazy because they're going to sink any minute. They can't swim. They're not graceful. It's a panic moment every moment. These four-legged animals are in the water. The reason is they're land animals. They're not water animals. But they can get across, you know, but our job is to also help them get across. Now, here's what happens. You get in the middle sometimes, and animals panic. They can sense panic, right? And they all have a herd instinct. These animals, don't forget, they're herd animals. They have a herd instinct. If one panics, the whole herd panics. It's not like the whole herd goes, Oh, gee, that guy over there's panic. Maybe you'll get out of it, but I'm okay. No, herd instinct animals, when emotion hits the herd, they all have it like that. So here's what happens. Now they're like that. And we're taking them through the river, and it's a fast river. It's got a deep part and everything like this. And so if you're a vaquero and you're out there, and for some reason you got to get a calf, put it on your horse, get it across and everything, your horse panics. All of a sudden, everyone's in the river. You're in the middle of all these panicked animals and everything. You're going to drown, guaranteed, right? That's why you want the man to ride the river with. He's going to come up to the edge and he's going to see you drowning. I've seen this happen. He's in no big hurry. He's going to let you drown for a while to teach you a lesson, right? To stay on your horse when you're in the river. Right? He's going to teach you a lesson, let you drown for a while. Takes out his rope. Of course, he can lasso anything he wants, but he pretends that he's learning, right? How do you do this? How do you do this? Meanwhile, the man's drowning, begging for help, right? At the very last minute, the man to ride the river with, boom, he'll lasso you and pull you out and save your life. That's why the ultimate compliment you can give another man is he's one to ride the river with. Because that means that man over there, I trust him with my life. He will save my life if I need it saved. So they would never look at me. They'd never say I ride tall in the saddle. And they would never say I'm the one to ride the river with. But I knew all that. I'm okay with that. So we're going on like this and everything. And then one night, we got the herd bedded down. And then you don't sleep all night long because you got to ride herd a 2-hour shift, right? And two vaqueros, you ride herd like this. One goes one way, one goes the other way, and you're circling the herd. And your job is to keep him bedded down until your shift is over, and then 2 more vaqueros will come, and they'll ride herd at night. And then what you do is you talk out loud and you sing. And I don't have a good singing voice. No vaqueros have a good singing voice. But cattle, for some reason, the sound of the human voice is very soothing to them. It calms them down. So you're either talking real loud to yourself, of course, or you're singing real loud to calm down the herd, keep them bedded down overnight. You don't want to stampede. That's the last thing you want. Get them down like this. So I'm riding herd, my 2-hour shift, and I'm riding. And when we'd cross the other vaquero and I would cross, we'd just give each other a slight nod of the head. That's all we would do. We don't need to actually talk or anything. But we're singing and we're talking out loud, keep the herd bedded down. Now notice off in the distance, lightning. Do not want to see that. That means there's a storm. And then I noticed the other vaquero when we passed, we both give each other a look now. Now it's not a nod. It's like, do you see that? Yeah, I saw that. And we want the storm to keep going that way, but of course it's not going to happen. That storm's coming towards us. Got my slicker in the back. I put it on because I know it's going to be bad pretty soon, right? So I got my slicker on. Now we're singing loud. Both of us are singing really loud because the horses, they start to feel, they feel the electrical energy of the storm coming, right? Feel the electrical energy of the storm coming in. And then what happens is, all of a sudden, kaboom! Storm's right on top of us, bolt of lightning right over the top of us. And for a second, it's daylight. You ever been that close to at nighttime with lightning strike? For a second, it's daylight. I look across and I see the other vaquero and he's looking at me too. We look at the herd, they're all up on the ground. It's totally silent after the boom, but the herd's all off of the ground. They just sprung up in the air. We look at each other. And then it was darkness. And then it was like the gates of hell had been opened up because of the bellowing of the animals. Stampede. If you ever heard the sound of a frightened animal, it's not a sound you want to hear a second time. It's not like their normal sound. It's a sound deep inside, this sound of fear coming out of an animal. Stampede. Now, we're mounted up. I'm mounted up, right? The next thing I hear is, I hear the trail boss, all men in the cook. Now, let me tell you about the cook. Cook, all he does is ride in the wagon and cook and clean up. That's all the cook does. But if you want all men mounted up, and you hear the trail boss say, all men in the cook, well, that's like the ship captain yelling, all men on deck, right? Every man is needed. Here's the deal about a stampede. Can't stop a stampede. They're animals, they're headlong. There's that story of them going off the cliff. That's a true story. That's actually happened, right? They're just running fearful in the dark straight ahead. Now, I'm already in my night horse, right? Now, you don't ride the same horse all the time. Believe it or not, people think you have the movies make you think you have one horse. No, you bring the remudo with you. You got 20, 30, 40 horses you bring with you because you're changing out horses all day long. Horse is only good for 2 to 4 hours, and they're done. You got to get a fresh horse. So, and there's different types of horses. There is a horse, I've already told you, got your river horse. That's a horse, might be the best horse at swimming, right? You got your long distance, like your daily driver. That's just your old daily driver, plodding long horse. And then you have your cutting horse. That's a very highly trained horse. That it's your best horse, actually, because that horse can turn on a dime, knows you're going after that calf, boom, like that, got your cutting horse. And I was on my night horse. Now, the night horse is the most sure-footed horse. Now, that's not a horse like a cat can see in the dark, especially I say. No, it's a more sure-footed horse because you're riding a horse in the dark and you got gullies, you got gopher holes, you got snake holes, you got ravines. You want a very sure-footed horse at night. So I'm on my night horse. Now, I'm already mounted up at the stampede. I hear Amen and the cook. I actually know what my job is. Can't stop a stampede. Here's what you got to do. You have to turn a stampede. Instead of going straight, you got to get the cattle running in a circle, okay? That's what you got to do. If you can get them running in a circle, eventually they just poop out. And other than the sweat and the tiredness, to them it's like it never happened. You know, they forgot about it. So we got to turn the herd. But I'm already mounted up. So my job in the other vaquero, we got to get in front of the herd and start to turn them, right? So we're making noise, we're doing everything, trying to get in front. Now let me tell you about that moment. I'm on my horse. If you ever rode a horse when you're galloping, you can feel the heartbeat. It's actually down by your thighs, by your knees, if you want to say. You feel the heartbeat down where their chest would be, down low. So my horse is running hard. I can feel the heartbeat on my leg, right? And my horse is afraid. It's picked up the fear from the herd. I'm afraid. I picked up my fear from everything, right? So now, feel the heartbeat. I feel I'm afraid. I got to tell you about horses when they're running hard. There's a lot of slobber coming back on you, right? It's like a rider running. You get a lot of spit in your mouth and you're always spitting. All that horse slobber's coming back at me. All that fear's in the air. A heartbeat on my leg like that. We're running headlong into the dark. I don't want to tumble over. Last thing you want to do is go down inside a stampede. If you go down inside a stampede, we think, no, this is nothing. It'll be ground to dirt with 1,500, 2,000 head of cattle coming over their hooves. You'll be ground to dirt. They'll find nothing of you the next day. So what happens is you got to stay mounted up. So we're going ahead like this, and I look over at the herd, and then my senses were overwhelmed. I got the heartbeat, I got the slobber, the fear, my own sweat, my own heartbeat's going crazy like this. And then what happens is this, I smell it. The smell of burning hair. It's a very distinct smell. Cattle, they got hair on there. You don't see it, you know, because when we get leather, it's all been taken off. But there's fine hair on cattle all the time. And then so they're in a dense pack and they're scared, they're scared and they're running. And the friction of their bodies is singeing the hair on their bodies. So now I'm smelling burnt hair on top of everything else. And then I look over. Now, if I were a poet, I'd write a poem. If I were a musician, I'd make a beautiful ballad song about what I saw next. Now, sailors, they have a name for it. It's called St. Elmo's fire. When they're out on the sea, and there's a big electrical storm over them, bzz, 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 these small little electrical darts jump from mast to mast, blue little sizzling electrical darts, and it's called St. Elmo's fire. Back home, farm people, country people, when they see it snaking along the ground, they call it foxfire. Where I looked over those cattle, first time in my life, I saw it. It was so beautiful, like time had stopped. Along the back of the cattle, zzz, zzz, these small little blue arcs jumping from horn to horn, going along the back like this and everything. It was so beautiful. It was so beautiful. But then I came back to my senses. I had to turn the herd, right? So we turned the herd. Herd circled up like this. Took us all night. Next morning, the trail boss wakes up. Does a head count. 1, 2, 3. I better count again. He looks at us and he says, "We're down a man. Mount up. You know what we got to do." A man had gone down in the stampede. So we mount up. You go back to the start of the stampede and you make a line. And you're all riding slow, looking at the ground, looking for something you don't want to find. So I'm riding and I look at the ground and I see down on the ground something shiny. And I go over, dismount, pick it up, I look at it. I knew what it was right away. It's a belt buckle, flattened belt buckle. That's what it was, flattened belt buckle. Take it over to the trail boss. Hey, trail boss, look what I found. Trail boss looks at it and he says, "That might be all we find." Yells at all the men, "Back to the camp, let's go." So we go back to the camp. And he shows the belt buckle to all the men. He says, we're all looking at his belt buckle yesterday, but that's all we got today. We got to give that good man proper burial. We all look at each other. All we got is the belt buckle, right? So we dig a hole, put the belt buckle in it, make a little mound, we get some sticks, some latigo strips, which are strips of leather, make a cross with a rock. We pound it into the ground over the mound underneath the belt buckle. We're all standing there quiet and we don't know what to say or do. We're waiting for the trail boss to tell us something. So I look up. Trail boss is looking at me. Now, I know the code of the West. I'm not going to be the first one to look away. I'm going to look at the trail boss. This is my chance to prove that I'm a righteous man. I'm locked in with the trail boss. I'm not going to be the first one to look away. I don't want to be all shifty eyes. Looking at the trail boss. Trail boss looks at me and he says, "You're the one that found the buckle. Why don't you say a few words?" Well, I got to tell you, I looked away. They could call me old shifty eyes all they wanted to. I would say a few words. I'm not a pastor or a priest or anything. What am I going to say? I don't know what to say. I'm the guy that rides drag in the back. And I look up, trail boss still looking at me. I got to tell you, another part of the Code of West says this: tell a man something once, that's enough. Don't repeat yourself. So he'd already told me to say a few words. I knew he wasn't going to repeat himself. He was just looking at me, expecting me to say a few words. I turn around and look at all the men. They're all looking at me. I don't care. I look away. Then I do the man thing. I pull my pants up. I put them down, scratch my ear, adjust my hat, clear my throat, kick the dirt a little bit. I look up. They're still looking at me. I gotta say something. I don't know what to say. Kicking the dirt, looking at the ground. Then it came to me. I knew what to say. You know what I did next? I looked at them. Took my time too, because I had it, so I was in no big hurry. First I looked at the trail boss. And I went around the circle. And I looked every single man in the eye. Almost made them be the first one to look away. And then looking at the trail boss, I said, "You know that good man? He was one to ride the river with." Trail boss, I think I saw a little smile. But he did give me a nod of the head, just like that. I thought I saw a little bitty smile. Trail boss said, "He was one to ride the river with." And that was it. It was all over. I'd come through. Trail boss says, "Mount up, men. We got 15 miles today. Let's go." It's all over. Now I got to tell you, it did that. My coming through, it didn't move me up the list. I'm still in back riding drag, right? But all the men from that day on, well, I'm not one they call ride tall in the saddle. I'm definitely not one they'd say I'm running to ride the river with. But from that day on, that man, those men, when they looked at me, finally, they looked at me with respect. because they knew I'd been there that night with them at the Stampede at Cimarron. Thank you very much. I love these cowboy stories because they tell you about a type of men. I'm going to tell you another little cowboy story called Cow Music. This is my favorite story. It's my favorite story, Cow Music. Once, there's always the owner of the ranch. He's the hacendado. He owns the hacienda. He owns the ranch, right? And then we all work for him. We're all in the outfit. We all work for him, you know. And then he lives in a fancy house. He's got a big fancy house and got the white picket fence there on where the ranch is. And his wife and kids are in there. And we're not allowed in the house. We're not even allowed inside the picket fence. Reason is we stay in the bunkhouse. We're just hired employees of the owner of the hacienda. So we know our place and we're respectful of it. And he treats us fine. And we're proud to have the work. It's good work. And so we're good about it. And if you work around men like this, you learn some things about these men. One, you learn about the code of the West. But you learn about those men too. And what I love about those men, what I love about myself a little bit is the three things we love. One of the things we love is we love the land we work on. The other thing we love is we love the animals we work with. And the third thing we love the men we work with. We're all men to ride the river with for each other, right? We save a man's life if we have to. And we know that about each other. So that's the type of men we are. I like those men. I like being part of those men when I'm with those men. So one day, one of the longtime vaqueros, well, he was at the end of the trail. He was knocking on heaven's door. And he didn't have long left. He was in the bunkhouse. And we knew he didn't have long left. So the trail boss, he goes up to the owner of the ranch, the hacendado, and he says, a good old man, he doesn't have much left. And this is why we liked working for the hacendado. He loved us too. Now we had to stay in the bunkhouse and he stayed in the White House, but he loved us too. And he had a special softness in his heart for the man that was dying because he'd been with him for so long. And he told the trail boss, go get the man, bring him in the house. We couldn't believe it. He's going to be put in the house. So soon enough, we carry him in, and first time I'd ever been in the house, I'm looking around and it's clean, it's nice. I'd like to live in the house rather than the bunkhouse. And then the trail boss says, put him in my bed. He gets to be in the hacendado says, put him in my bed. And we're going, he gets to be not only in the house, but he's going to be in the hacendado's bed. Oh my gosh. So we put him in the bed, and then we got to go back outside the picket fence, right? And only the trail boss got to stay inside. So right when he's about to die, right? He calls the trail boss over like this. And these were his last words on earth, his last breath. He calls the trail boss over and he says, can you bring the herd in? Bring the herd in. And the trail boss looks at the hacendado and says, give him whatever he wants. Bring the herd in. So now we got to go round up the herd and the horses and the cattle. We got to bring them close to the house and everything. And the dying man says, I can't hear him. Can you bring him closer? Well, if we want to bring him closer, he's going to knock over the white picket fence to bring him any closer. The trail boss looks at the hacendado, and the hacendado says, bring him in closer. So now we bring the herd in and knock over the fence. They trample all the white flowers and everything. And all of a sudden, we got the herd right outside the window of the dying man. Dying man gets a real peaceful look on his face. He died the way I want to die, actually. I thought about him. said, that's exactly how I want to die. I think all the men were having the same thought. Not in the hacendado's bed, that doesn't count. I just soon die on the ground out on the herd. And says, but what he wanted was this. And he looked up and we could hear his words because we were close to the window too, right? Says, you know, when I die, they say when you pass over, you go to the pearly gates, you're going to hear the bells ringing. And you're going to hear the angels singing. I learned that in church, but that's not what I want. You know what I want? The last things I want to hear. And then he pointed out like this. And then we listened real carefully too. He said, and then we heard it. We heard the pawing of the bulls as they pawed in the ground. We heard the braying of the calves searching for their mothers. We heard the bellowing of the herd. We heard the whinnying of the horses. The sound of the animals, right? It's what we heard. And the dying man, his last words were this: I'm ready. And as he closed his eyes, he said, these are the last sounds I wanted to hear on earth. The sounds of my beloved cow music. And from that day on, we all carried the memory. And I admit, now I pay more attention to that sound. Because one day what I'm going to want when I'm headed toward the last roundup, when I'm knocking on heaven's doors, when I take my last breath, as I close my eyes on this earth for the last time, you know what I want to hear? Same thing that Vaquero wanted to hear.
Lost Highways dispatches from the shadows of the Rocky Mountains. Coming back from Europe to be with Richard.
Hold on. That's not what I wanted to hear. What I wanted to hear...
I'm not sure I understand.
Hold on a second.
In the United States in 1970.
Okay, now we're back on here. The last thing I want to hear is not my phone making noise out of nowhere. I've turned it off, actually. The last thing I want to hear is my beloved cow music. Thank you very much. Okay. How we doing?
I'd say we're doing good. I'd say we probably have time for one more.
One more story. Better be my favorite story, right?
Absolutely.
Okay, believe it or not, I'm a third of the way through my list. Hey, I wasn't exaggerating. I had 5 hours of stories ready to go here. Whenever I give talks, Andrew and I were talking before, I do give a lot of talks and everything, and I do know a lot of this and that about what I talk about and everything. One of the ratios I like to have an hour of knowledge for 10 minutes of talking. And the reason is I like to have that preponderance of, there's no way in 10 minutes I'm going to do an hour's worth of knowledge. But I like to have an hour's worth of knowledge for 10 minutes of talking, because you never know where the spider web's going to go, right? Or where a question might go. And if someone asks me a question, I need all that knowledge ready to go. So I actually came ready to do 5 or 6 hours of talking. I knew we weren't going to do that. But what we're going to do, of course, is I'm literally about a third of the way through here. Let me look at my thing. Okay, I've done Chistes, comic tales. I've done some children's tales. I did an adventure tale. Those are the Tres Buenos Consejos. I've done some Vaquero tales. If you want to know more about these stories, these 2 books, if you like reading stories, there's 45 stories in this book, 45 stories in this book. Buy my books. I don't know what to tell you. See if the library has them. See if they'll get them and put them on the shelves, okay? Check out my books. If you like reading these type of stories, they're from here. None of the cowboy stories are in here, but the other stories are all in here. And there's other stories too, like this and everything. I will tell, what am I going to tell? Oh, I know what I'm going to tell. I'm going to tell La Llorona's Final Cry. Okay. Now, of all the folk tales of the Hispanic Southwest, one of the most, in fact, the most dominant folk character is La Llorona. One of the ways that you know that it's widely dispersed in our culture is if there's a lot of versions of it. If there's only one version, that means people don't tell it very much. They don't take it personal. They don't tell it in the house. That's the version. They don't worry about it. But if there's a story with a lot of versions, that means people have taken it to heart. They've told it in their house. They've told it in their village. And what happens when a story is told a lot, it changes over time. The ending gets changes. People just improvise it. And then, so La Llorona, excuse me, there's a lot of versions of this story. It's the most dominant, most well-known cultural legend throughout Mexico, Latin America, the Hispanic Southwest, the legend La Llorona. It's parallel to the Medea story, the Greek legend of Medea. Medea had been done wrong by Jason. And she was so torn up by Jason in the Greek legend that she throws her kids she kills her kids to punish Jason, because Jason had been unfaithful to her. So that's the story of Medea in the Greek legend. The story of La Llorona is the same story. La Llorona, Llorona is a weeping woman. Lloró means to cry in Spanish. So La Llorona is the weeping woman. And she's been punished for all eternity for killing her kids, to wander up and down the river calling for her kids, mis hijos, mis hijos. And it's kind of become the boogeyman story. Adults use it to make kids be good, because adults tell the La Llorona story, and then they tell their kids, if you're not good in school, La Llorona is going to come and get you. If you don't eat out all your food, La Llorona is going to come and get you. If you don't be good in church, La Llorona is going to come and get you. If you keep acting like that, La Llorona. And when you're a little kid and your mind's full of imagination, La Llorona is like a real thing, you know, I better be good or La Llorona is going to get me. And then you'd meet these people who have never met La Llorona, but the brother of their friend's cousin had seen La Llorona. So there's all these things going through the village about who's seen La Llorona. So you'll never meet a person who's actually seen La Llorona, but the brother of a friend's cousin's wife in another village, they saw La Llorona. So people believed in La Llorona, and the parents liked having La Llorona as an admonishment to children. So one of the things that happened to me, I tell one of my versions of La Llorona. I have a lot of them. It happened a lot. It's always a little old lady, never a man for some reason, always a little old lady. Little old viejita, little old lady comes up after the show. Oh, Senor, to be here, your storytelling was so enjoyable. And that La Llorona story, you did a really good job in that La Llorona story, but you got it all wrong. And I'd say, oh, gee, tell me what I got wrong. Well, let me tell you how it's supposed to be. I'd ask her to sit down, tell me your story. And of course, there'd be a couple parts different than my story. And I love that moment, because that meant La Llorona, that was their version, right? Different from my version. So I'm going to tell you one version about this story. It's got an interesting connection. Remember, I told you all these stories belong in different categories. This category is from the category of stories called the Grateful Dead stories. Now, let me tell you about the Grateful Dead stories. Hey, trucking. Andrew's too young, but I'm not. The Grateful Dead, right? Grateful Dead back in the 60s, and they had a long run, decades-long run as a band, Jerry Garcia, coming out of San Francisco. They would have, if you're deadheads, and there are people are deadheads. I was never a deadhead. My group of my friends, we always made fun of the Grateful Dead. Oh, they're just a bunch of San Francisco pothead hippies playing songs that lasted an hour, and their concerts lasted 3 days, you know. So I was never a deadhead, but I knew deadheads. They're all in the Grateful Dead. So Grateful Dead, one of the most successful types of jam bands, and they would sell out Red Rocks here in Denver. And they would do 3 nights, and people would travel. They'd follow them all over the United States, deadheads and everything. Reason I'm telling you this story is where the Grateful Dead got their name. Now, the origin story of the Grateful Dead is kind of lost in antiquity, but the version I believe that I've read is this, is The Grateful Dead, they're just a hippie band in San Francisco back in the 60s. They needed a name, right? And then so Jerry Garcia and his buddies in the band, they learned about the Grateful Dead stories, the type of story, right? Grateful Dead is a dead person, but their soul is not released to go to heaven because they did something wrong on earth. So if another person allows them to do a good deed so that their soul is released to go to heaven, well, then they're gratefully dead to the person that allowed them the opportunity to do a good deed, kind of to clean up their soul so they go to heaven. So that's the mythos of this category of stories called the Grateful Dead stories. And the Grateful Dead took it upon themselves that their mission on earth was going to bring goodness to allow people's souls through their music to be redeemed, to be revived, right? So that people would have a good life on earth and in the afterlife. So that's the connection of the Grateful Dead type of story to the band, the Grateful Dead. I think it's one of those little trivia things that when I discovered it, I'm going, wow, well, that is super cool because I actually happen to know Grateful Dead stories. So here's a La Llorona story, my La Llorona story about, it's a Grateful Dead story. And when I tell the story, you understand why. Okay, once there was a little boy and girl, Mundo and Lupe. Now Mundo, his name was Mundo. His name was Edmundo, but his nickname was Mundo, which means the earth, but his nickname was Mundo. And Lupe, her name was Guadalupe, but her nickname was Lupe. Now Mundo and Lupe, I got to tell you about Mundo and Lupe. They're like the Tres Ratoncitos, that story I told earlier in the evening. They were just flat out brats is what they were. So here's what happened. Mundo and Lupe, all they did was just cause trouble. They wouldn't go to school. They'd act up in school. They'd turn around in church. They caused trouble in church. They were disrespectful to their elders. All they did was cause trouble. And one of the things about where they lived, there was a river. And they'd heard the legend of La Llorona that you're not supposed to go down to the river late at night because that's when La Llorona would go up and down the river going, mis hijos, mis hijos, mis hijos. And La Llorona would take you, right? And keep you forever, and people would never see you again because La Llorona had gotten you down by the river. So every child know, don't go down by the river by yourself late at night because that's when La Llorona is going up and down the river crying for children to take, to make up for the children she'd thrown into the river, because according to the La Llorona myth. So what happened is this. They're down by the river playing late at night, right? And mom said, come in, because they're not paying attention to her. You better come in, it's getting dark, because they're not paying attention to her. And then the mom decided, okay, I guess I'm going to have to do it. I'm going to have to use it. If you don't come in right now, La Llorona is going to get you. And Mundo and Lupe looked at each other, and they're the type of kids who make fun of La Llorona. And they'd go, whoa, La Llorona is going to get us. Are you scared? I'm scared to death. So they're making fun of La Llorona. They don't come in. And the mom, she just had it. She said, they'll come in when it gets dark. And I'm wondering. So she went inside the house. Mom went to bed, right? Now, Mundo and Lupe, they're out there playing, and it's kind of darkish and everything, you know. They knew they'd go back in pretty soon, but they're taking their sweet time about it. When they see something in the forest across the river, they see a flash, like a white cloth or something. And they look at it, and then it's gone. And they look at each other, and for a moment, they are a little bit afraid. And they see the white flash again. And then Lupe, she grabs her brother's hand and said, Mundo, did you see that flash? And Mundo says, yeah, I saw that flash. And then Lupe and Mundo, they said, maybe we should go home, go inside. And Mundo says, nah, we're not going inside. We're going to go see what that flash is. And then Lupe says, but we're not supposed to cross the river. And then Mundo says, he said, oh, Uncle Tio, he showed me where the rocks are. I know how to get across the river. We're going to be okay. Sure enough, he did know where the rocks were, and they walked across the river. Now they're in the forest. And they see the flash again. And they're looking around, and then they see and they're curious kids, so they start following the flash deeper into the forest, like the flash of the white cloth, a purpose, for some reason, taking them deeper into the forest. And then they look around and they notice that it's gotten really dark, right? It's late at night. And they're starting to feel maybe they're lost. And Mundo and Lupe look at each other, and Lupe says, Mundo, do you know where we're at? Do you know how to get home? And Mundo says, oh, I know how to get home. It's right over. Yeah, it's right over. And then they both realized at that moment they were deep in the forest, gotten really dark, and they were lost in the forest. And then they heard a voice. It was a woman's voice. Plaintive, sad voice. And the voice said, mis hijos, my children, you come back to me. And then they both realized it was La Llorona. And they looked around behind them and they saw a white cloth coming at them really fast. And they started running with their little legs going like this. And they're running and running. And pretty soon their little legs are spinning in the air like this because these cold hands and arms had wrapped around them and pulled them up in the air like this. La Llorona had caught them. And La Llorona said, mijos, my children, you come back to me. And she took him deep in the forest. The next morning, the mom woke up and she said, oh boy, I got to get those kids up for school. They've slept too long. And she goes into their room and the beds, they hadn't been sleeping in the bed. She said, oh man, they're sleeping on the couch in the living room, probably spent the whole night up when there's no sign of him in the house. And then she remembers the last time she saw them down by the river. Now she knows La Llorona didn't get them, but she knew there's a chance they drowned in the river playing. So she goes down to the river and she throws herself in the river and she's thrashing and thrashing and thrashing like this and everything. And she's pulling her hair out and she's crying and yelling and crying. And then all the people of the village come out and they find her by the river and they comfort her and they bring her in because they think the kids have drowned. And then the men go in the water and they're looking around and the men come out and say, the children aren't here. They didn't drown. We don't know where they're at. Well, that drove the mom crazy. And her screaming and yelling, you could hear her voice and she's tearing her teeth out and she's hitting the ground and her crying from like a parent that's lost a child. Only a parent that has children knows the panic that you have when you think your children are gone forever and the deep sorrow. And that plaintive crying sorrow voice went deep in the forest. And then La Llorona's deep in the forest with the two kids. Mijos, my children, you come back to me. And then La Llorona heard the crying of the woman. And at that moment, her heart was deeply touched. And she said, it's my punishment to wander up and down the river for all eternity, crying for my kids that I've lost. But I will never bring that grief and sorrow to another mother, another woman. And she let go of the kids. And she told them, go home. Now the kids, their feet touch the ground and they're frozen still. She says, no, go home, go home. I cannot cause your mom that type of sadness. Go home. And they were still, and then she said, boo! As soon as she said boo, they took off running. Their little feet were going like that. And they turned around, and you know what they saw? They couldn't believe what they saw. They saw like some lightning, like a lightning going from the ground up to the sky. They went real fast, just like that. And then now they were scared. They ran home. They ran into the house. And then the mom saw him, and the mom was crying. She was talking to me. I was going to come back to her. And they said, where you been? And then the kids were saying, oh, Mom, you don't believe what happened. And she was like, people said, it was mijos. And she got us. La Llorona got us. And she says, I don't want to hear that La Llorona story. I want to know where you've been. No, really, La Llorona. It's like people said, we felt her hot breath on my neck. She took us in the forest. She says, she's crying, mijos. And then she let us go. I don't want to hear that La Llorona story. Mom, it really happened. It was La Llorona. Okay, if you're going to keep lying to me, we're going into the village right now. You're going to talk to the priest. And if you lie to the priest, you know what's going to happen to you. And so they went into the village. They went to the church and they called the priest out. And the priest said, what are you here for? My kid's got a story to tell and they better tell the truth in front of the priest. So here's what happened. The mom said, the kid said, told him the whole story about La Llorona. And then the priest said, wait a minute. Tell me that last part again. Well, we turned around and looked, we saw a light go back up to the sky. It was scary. The priest said, take me to that spot. So now it's daytime, right? So then they went out and they went across the river and they were looking around in the forest, and the kids kind of remembered where it was and everything. And then one of the kids said, look, look, here it is. This is right where it happened. And there's a white cloth on the ground. And the priest came over and he looked at the white cloth. And he looked at the mother and he said, your children are telling the truth. This cloth is all that is left of La Llorona. And then he told him, what you saw was La Llorona's soul going up to heaven. Because when La Llorona did a good deed and let the children go so that she would not cause grief and sorrow in another woman's life, at that moment, her sins were all forgiven and her soul was released from its punishment. And what you saw was her soul going up on the heavenly light to La Gloria, heaven itself. Well, from that day forward, the priest folded up the cloth, gave it to the children and said, tell this story to your own children one day. So years later, Mundo and Lupe, they were growing up and adults, they had their own kids. Whenever the family would get together, all the kids would come together, tell us the story, tell us the story, tell us the story of La Llorona. And they'd go into the special room where they kept it in a special drawer, and they'd open up the drawer and they'd take out the white cloth and they'd put it on the ground. They'd have all the kids sit around the white cloth. And then they'd tell them the story I just told you, the story of La Llorona's final cry. Thank you very much. I want to thank Andrew. I'm looking at Ann right here. I see her name. I've told stories for 2 solid hours. I've enjoyed doing this. Thanks for hanging in there. Andrew, you've heard a lot of new stories. I on purpose didn't tell the stories I told last summer because I got too many stories. I just decided to tell a bunch of different stories. I've enjoyed this quite a bit. Thank you so much. I hope one day we would do this in person with Ignacio. Thank you so much.
Thank you as well. And I look forward to it as well.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
I'm going to sign off.
Sounds great.
We'll talk later. Okay, Ann's gone. Andrew, thank you so much. I enjoyed it.
I did as well. Absolutely.